Hello there, and welcome to Planet in Question, where curiosity takes its time and wonder is allowed to drift slowly, like leaves on a quiet river. Tonight's thought is one that may feel almost impossible at first, and yet, if you let it settle gently, you may find it begins to glow with a kind of haunting possibility. It isn't about the cities we know, the glowing skylines, the rush of traffic, the way lights come alive as the sun sets, but about something stranger. What if the very first cities on this planet weren't ours at all? What if stone streets and gathering places, towers and temples rose not thousands of years ago, but millions? It feels like the start of a myth, doesn't it? Something told by firelight, whispered with half a smile. And yet, when you really pause to think about the enormity of Earth's history, the idea doesn't sound quite so far-fetched. Our own story is so brief compared to the deep timeline beneath our feet. We think of history as stretching back thousands of years, ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, but these are only the last thin brushstrokes on an unimaginably vast canvas. If Earth's entire life were compressed into a single day, the rise of humans would come only in the final seconds before midnight. All the wars and poems, all the discoveries and monuments, all the cities you've ever walked through or dreamed about would be less than the blink of an eye. The rest of the day would be filled with oceans rising and falling, continents drifting, forests blooming and vanishing, creatures evolving and disappearing. With so much time behind us, isn't it strange to imagine that we are the very first to build? Take a moment to picture the ground beneath wherever you are right now. Maybe you're lying in bed, the weight of blankets pressing down gently, or maybe you're listening with the glow of morning sun coming through your window. Beneath your home, beneath the roads you know, beneath even the deepest foundations of any modern city, lie layers upon layers of forgotten worlds. Soil becomes stone, stone becomes folded mountains, mountains wear away into sand again. Each layer is a page of Earth's long book, written in silence and pressure. But like any book, not all the pages survive. Whole chapters are missing, lost to erosion, melted back into the planet's molten heart, or carried far from their original place by drifting plates. The deeper you go, the fewer pieces remain. What would happen to a city written on those early pages? The truth is, our world is a restless keeper of memory. Even our tallest buildings, made of steel and concrete, would vanish in surprisingly little time if abandoned. Plants creep in, roots split stone, weather pulls walls down grain by grain. Within centuries they'd be ruins. Within thousands of years those ruins would be buried. And within millions, they might be nothing but minerals pressed into strange shapes, mistaken for natural features. The ground is always recycling itself, rewriting the story. Which means that if there were cities built long before us, they might already be gone, lost not through any conspiracy, but simply through the quiet persistence of time. There's something almost humbling in that thought. We tend to imagine that what we've built will last forever, that our bridges and towers will stand as monuments to human achievement. But the Earth has patience we can't comprehend. It outlives empires, outlives languages, outlives even species. It will outlive us too, folding our cities into dust and stone. And if it has already done so before, if others built and vanished before us, the evidence might lie so deep that we would never know. The question becomes not just could it have happened, but would we even notice if it had? Science sometimes brushes against this idea with a thought experiment known as the Silurian hypothesis. It asks whether an industrial civilization, millions of years older than our own, could ever be detected today. The unsettling answer is that it would be very, very difficult. Direct evidence like buildings, tools, roads would almost certainly be gone. What might remain would be subtle. Unusual isotopes in rock layers, chemical traces in sediments, perhaps odd patterns in fossil distribution. Things so small and scattered that they might be dismissed as natural anomalies. So even if ancient cities once existed, the planet itself might have hidden them too well for us to ever find. And yet, our minds return to the thought again and again. Myths of lost civilizations appear in almost every culture. Atlantis swallowed by the sea, Shambhala hidden in the mountains. Cities of gold said to vanish into forests. We tell these stories not just because they're entertaining, but because some part of us suspects the world might be holding secrets under its surface. Perhaps the myths are not literal memories, but echoes of a deeper truth, that civilizations can rise and fall, and that time has a way of swallowing even the grandest of them. Imagine for a moment walking across an empty desert. The sand stretches endlessly, dunes shifting in the wind. Nothing suggests a city was ever there. But millions of years earlier, perhaps towers rose here, built not by human hands but by some other intelligence. Perhaps a river flowed through, feeding farms and plazas. Perhaps voices filled the air, speaking languages we will never hear again. Now, all that remains is silence, and even that silence has been sculpted by time. You wouldn't know unless you looked closer, unless you asked the kind of question we're asking tonight. What if? Of course, we have no proof. That's the point. This is less about certainty than it is about possibility, about letting the mind stretch across deep time. There's something soothing in that stretch. It reminds us how small we are, how brief our presence here really is. It also reminds us that the universe is wide and full of surprises. Maybe Earth has already seen experiments in civilization long before us. Maybe we are not the first, only the most recent. Or maybe we really are the first, and our cities are the opening notes of a song that will echo long after we're gone. Either way, the idea asks us to see ourselves differently, not as the inevitable outcome of history, but as one fleeting chapter in a book that still has countless pages left to be written. So tonight, as we ease into this journey together, let's let go of the need for answers. Instead, let's simply hold the question, what if the first cities weren't ours? What if long before us, on a world we would not recognize, in climates we could hardly endure, someone else gathered together, built walls and homes, and watched as their cities rose and fell, leaving behind nothing but whispers in the stone? If you find thoughts like this calming, gentle, curious, but never in a hurry, I'd be grateful if you tapped the like button or subscribed. It helps this quiet corner find others who might be looking for the same kind of soft company. And in a way, it's a bit like leaving a small lantern burning in the night, a signal for fellow travelers who might pass this way later. For now, take a breath. Feel the air around you, the weight of your body where you're resting. Notice the simple fact that you are here, in this moment, listening. And as we step further into this idea together, let's let the thought be what it is. Not an answer, but a doorway. A doorway into the deep past, into speculation, into wonder. The first cities may have been ours, or they may not. The earth keeps her secrets, but that doesn't mean we can't lean close and listen for echoes. Chapter 1. A city that time forgot. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a city you know well. Maybe it's the one you live in now. Maybe it's a place you visited or dreamed about. Picture the streets, the tall buildings, the parks or rivers that cut through it. Picture the way light falls on glass windows, or how cobblestones look when rain has just passed. Now, imagine walking away from that city and leaving it to time. No one returns, no one repairs the roads or keeps the lights running. The first weeks are quiet, the traffic lights still flickering on and off even though there's no one there to watch. Within months, plants begin to creep across sidewalks, trees sprout in cracks, birds nest in empty apartments. Within a decade, the place feels more like a forest with ruins than a city with trees. 100 years later, the tallest towers are crumbling, their steel skeletons rusting into red dust. In just 1,000 years, that whole place might be swallowed by forest, river, or sand, and in 1,000,000 years, nothing recognizable remains. We sometimes think of cities as permanent, as if the stone and steel we use are immune to time, but they are not. Concrete breaks down, iron rusts, glass shatters. Plastics, even if they linger, are ground into invisible particles and scattered. The earth is patient. It wears everything down. When you stretch the timeline out not to decades or centuries but to millions of years, permanence becomes an illusion. Even mountains are not permanent. The Himalayas, taller than any skyscraper, are rising and eroding at the same time, shaped by forces beneath the earth. Given enough time, they too will vanish into the sea. If mountains cannot endure, how can cities? It makes you wonder how much of the past has already been erased. When we uncover ruins from a few thousand years ago, we call them ancient. The pyramids, the temples of Angkor, the stone cities of the Maya, these seem impossibly old to us. And yet, they are all still visible, because not enough time has passed for them to completely vanish. If they had been built 10 million years ago, we would not be finding them today. They would have been ground down, buried and reformed into stone that we'd walk across without suspecting anything at all. The city would still exist, in a way, but only as minerals, layers and chemical traces. The story of it would be erased. So what if there were cities millions of years ago? What if entire civilizations built and vanished before we ever arrived? If we stumbled across their traces today, would we even know what we were looking at? Imagine walking through a canyon and noticing a streak of strange mineral in the rock. Perhaps you'd assume it was natural, the way geologists explain most anomalies. But what if it was the faint echo of something once shaped by intelligence? A wall or a foundation pressed into stone and then lost. The thought is both eerie and calming, because it suggests the ground beneath us might hold forgotten stories, even if they are beyond our ability to read. There's also something deeply humbling about thinking this way. We like to imagine ourselves as the pioneers of civilization. We like to picture our cities as the beginning of a grand narrative, as if humanity were the climax of Earth's story. But when you look at the scale of time, that feels less certain. Perhaps we are just one of many. Perhaps civilizations come and go like tides, rising briefly, building, and then falling into silence. We wouldn't know, because Earth erases her own history. She writes over it like a chalkboard, endlessly cleaned and rewritten. The traces we see are only the most recent chalk lines. Think of a fossil for a moment, a delicate imprint of a leaf, a bone turned to stone. That's what survives of creatures that lived millions of years ago. The rest of their world, the forests, the rivers, the sounds they made are gone. Only fragments remain, and we piece them together carefully, like puzzle pieces with most of the box missing. If that's what happens to living things, how much harder would it be to detect the traces of cities? A skyscraper turned to dust might leave less behind than the skeleton of a fish. And yet, we still try to imagine. We imagine the forgotten city as a kind of dreamscape, where towers become cliffs and roads become riverbeds. We imagine plazas filled not with people but with silence. We imagine time sweeping through, erasing signs of life until all that remains is a whisper in the rock. A city that time forgot would not be empty. It would be repopulated by roots, by animals, by rivers cutting new paths. The city would become part of the earth again, indistinguishable from the landscape. It would not be lost to destruction but to transformation. When you think about it this way, every place you know could hold layers of forgotten cities beneath it. Beneath your own street there might be bones of older worlds, not just biological but perhaps even technological. The fact that we haven't found them doesn't mean they were never there. It may only mean the earth has hidden them too well. If an ancient city was built where a modern ocean now lies, the evidence is unreachable. If it was built on a plain that later sank beneath tectonic plates, the evidence is gone forever. Our planet is not a museum preserving everything, it is more like a river, carrying things forward and sweeping others away. Perhaps the most haunting part of this thought is that it suggests a kind of loneliness. If others came before us and vanished, we are alone, not because no one else tried, but because the earth does not remember them. It is as if voices once spoke, but the echoes have faded. And yet, there's also comfort here. If others built before us, if others lived and dreamed and told their own stories, then we are part of a larger rhythm. We are not alone in our effort to make meaning out of the brief time we have. We are part of a cycle, one that stretches back farther than we can see. So when you think of a city forgotten by time, don't think only of ruins or decay. Think of it as a transformation. Imagine the walls becoming cliffs, the towers becoming mountains, the plazas becoming valleys filled with rivers. Imagine the city not as erased but as rewritten, its story blended into the larger story of the earth. And imagine, gently, that maybe this has already happened. Maybe beneath your feet, beneath the stone and soil, lie the faintest whispers of cities we'll never know. And maybe one day, long after we are gone, our own cities will join them, folded into silence, remembered only by the patient stone of the earth. Chapter 2. How long is a million years? When we talk about time in our daily lives, we almost always mean something small. An hour passing slowly when we are waiting for news. A week that feels long after too many tasks. A year that seems to vanish as quickly as it came. Even centuries, when spoken of in history, feel tangible. We can picture the last few hundred years with stories and artifacts. We can even trace back thousands of years, to ancient temples and pyramids that still stand against the sky. But when the word million enters the conversation, something happens in the mind. It no longer feels like time in the same sense. It becomes something abstract, almost impossible to touch. Imagine 1 million grains of sand laid out before you. Even if you stared at them for hours, you could never count them all. 1 million is too vast to grasp, and yet, in the life of the Earth, 1 million years is just a small unit, like a single tick of a much larger clock. Our planet has existed for about 4.5 billion years. That means the Earth has lived through more than 4,000 units of 1 million. To think of it another way, if Earth's entire history were compressed into a single day, 1 million years would be less than 4 minutes. This scale is hard to hold in the mind. It makes human history, with all its wars and empires and cities, seem impossibly small. All of human civilization, the moment we first began farming, the time when we first gathered in permanent settlements, has happened within the last 10,000 years. 10,000. That is 1/100th of 1 million. And yet, in that short span, we look around at our skyscrapers, our satellites, our sprawling cities, and think we are permanent. To feel the weight of 1 million years, you might begin with something familiar. A tree. Some trees alive today are nearly 5,000 years old. They have seen empires rise and fall. They have watched as humans invented writing, discovered mathematics, and built cities, and yet even those trees are not close to 1 million years. Imagine the tree living its life again and again, 200 times over, and still you would not reach 1 million. Now imagine how many forests have risen and fallen in that span. How many rivers have changed their course. How many coastlines have shifted, swallowing land or exposing new stretches of earth. 1 million years is long enough for continents themselves to move. If you looked at a map of the world 1 million years ago, it would not look quite the same as today. Continents drift slowly, but in 1 million years, coastlines creep, mountains rise higher, valleys deepen. In 10 million years, the difference is dramatic. In 100 million, unrecognizable. So what happens to a city in that time? It does not simply crumble. It is carried away, folded into the moving crust of the planet. It becomes part of the Earth's memory, but not in a way we could easily read. And yet, in our everyday thoughts, we tend to flatten time. We speak of the dinosaurs as though they all existed together, roaming the world side by side. But dinosaurs themselves ruled for more than 160 million years. That's 160 separate slices of 1 million. For perspective, the time separating us from the ancient city of Babylon is about 4,000 years. The time separating us from the last dinosaurs is 65 million years. That is not just history, it is almost beyond imagination. If civilizations had risen in any of those stretches, they would be entirely gone now. Think of it this way. When you stand on solid ground, you are standing on a stack of time. Beneath your feet are layers that have recorded countless ages. Some hold fossils of creatures we can hardly picture. Some hold only the pressure and heat of ages long gone. And in those layers, millions of years pass without any witnesses we would recognize. That is the strangeness of deep time. It is filled with silence as much as with sound. It is not just years stretching out endlessly, but worlds coming and going, none of which we were here to see. To imagine 1 million years properly, you have to let your mind drift into a slower rhythm. Think of a river carving a canyon. Day by day, nothing noticeable changes. A single year is almost invisible. But give the river 1 million years, and it sculpts an entire landscape, carving stone like butter. That is what time does, not only to rocks, but to civilizations. It erases, reshapes, folds, and buries. A city that stands tall now might be gone without a trace long before 1 million years have passed. And if it had stood 1 million years ago, what would we find today? Perhaps nothing at all. This is where the question becomes haunting, because if 1 million years is long enough to erase almost everything, then even if there had been cities before us, we would not expect to find them. The silence of evidence does not mean the silence of history. It only means that time has been thorough. And when we imagine forgotten cities, what we are really imagining is the invisibility of time, the way it swallows all things, leaving only hints, if any. But there is also a gentleness in that thought. 1 million years does not erase everything violently. It erases with patience. It lets roots spread through walls. It lets rain carry sand across ruins. It lets mountains rise and oceans shift. It is a process of transformation rather than destruction. What once stood as a tower might become part of a hill. What once was a paved street might turn into a seam of rock in a cliff face. The city is not gone, it has only changed shape, absorbed into the earth itself. So when you hear the phrase millions of years ago, don't let it slip past as an abstraction. Pause and let the weight of it settle. Picture how many sunrises and sunsets that would be. Picture how many generations of creatures lived and died in that span. Picture continents drifting, mountains rising, forests blooming and vanishing. 1,000,000 years is not just a number. It is a world, lived and lost, one that we will never see. And yet, the question remains, gently pressing at the edges of our imagination. In all those millions of years, could there have been others like us? Not exactly human, not with our cities and languages, but builders nonetheless. Could they have left behind their own streets, their own monuments, their own attempts to last? If they did, the earth has kept their secret well. But perhaps, every now and then, when we stumble upon an odd formation in stone or an unexplained layer in the earth, we are brushing against the faintest whisper of their presence. Perhaps the silence is not the silence of absence, but the silence of time itself, too deep for us to hear clearly. 1,000,000 years is difficult to hold in the mind, but perhaps that is the gift of the thought. It asks us to slow down, to step outside the rush of minutes and hours, and to recognize the scale of the story we are part of. Our cities, our lives, our very species, these are all brief flickers against a backdrop that stretches beyond measure. And if, long ago, other flickers burned for a while and then faded, then maybe we are less alone than we think. Maybe the earth has held many chapters of civilization, each one rising, falling and vanishing into the deep quiet of time. Chapter 3. The problem of evidence. If you've ever held a fossil in your hand, you know how delicate and surprising the past can be. A spiral shell pressed into stone, a fern leaf preserved in fine detail, a bone turned to mineral and locked in rock. It feels solid, and yet you know it's only an accident of preservation, a lucky survival. For every fossil we find, there are countless more that were lost, washed away, broken apart, melted back into the earth. Evidence, when it comes to deep time, is never the whole story. It is only fragments, and fragments can be misleading. This is the heart of the problem when we wonder about cities millions of years ago. Even our own cities, built of steel and glass, would leave very little behind if abandoned. Within centuries, weather would break them down. Within thousands of years, forests and rivers would cover them. Within millions of years, geological forces would bury them, grind them, and fold them into stone. A city that once stretched for miles might leave behind no more than a few chemical anomalies in the rocks, or some strange mineral patterns that don't quite fit natural explanations. And even those would be hard to recognize, because nature itself creates plenty of anomalies. Volcanoes scatter rare elements, meteor impacts scatter metals, rivers deposit unusual sediments. How could we tell the difference between a geological quirk and the trace of something once built? Archaeology works because we are looking at the near past. The ruins of Mesopotamia, the temples of Egypt, the stone cities of the Andes, all of these are young, measured in thousands of years, not millions. Their stones are still stacked, their carvings can still be read, but push the clock back farther and the evidence dissolves. The oldest human structures we know, simple stone arrangements, are about 12,000 years old. That's a blink in geological time. When we imagine looking for cities millions of years old, we are imagining looking for something that would not look like a city anymore. It would look like rock, dust, or nothing at all. And yet, the Earth does keep some records. Layers of sediment hold chemical signatures of events long past. In some rocks, we find spikes of certain elements that suggest asteroid impacts or massive volcanic eruptions. In ice cores, we find bubbles of ancient air that reveal the composition of the atmosphere thousands of years ago. If a civilization had once burned fuels or produced industrial chemicals on a massive scale, it is possible that some trace of that might remain. A thin band in the rocks with unusual isotopes. A shift in carbon levels that doesn't match natural cycles. These would be whispers, not shouts, and they would be easy to miss, but they might be there. Scientists sometimes use the phrase, the geological record, as though the Earth were a careful librarian keeping track of everything. But in truth, it's more like a diary that keeps getting rewritten. Pages are torn out, rewritten, burned, and then overwritten again. The deeper into time you look, the fewer pages survive, and the ones that do are often smudged, difficult to read. The fact that we can reconstruct anything at all about ancient climates, supercontinents, or the first forms of life is a kind of miracle. Expecting to find the clear outlines of an ancient city in that shifting record may be asking too much. Still, it's worth asking, because even if the evidence is thin, thinking about what could remain helps us understand the fragility of our own world. If our civilization were to vanish today, what traces would endure millions of years into the future? A few might. Some plastics might leave chemical residues. Radioactive isotopes from nuclear testing might persist in rocks. Certain kinds of mines, where we've removed enormous amounts of material, might leave scars that resist erasure for longer. But even then, the evidence would not look like cities. It would look like odd patterns in the rocks, perhaps recognizable only to a future intelligence that already suspects what to look for. And that brings us to another part of the problem: recognition. Even if evidence survived, would we recognize it for what it was? Imagine a geologist in some distant future examining a thin slice of rock. They notice an unusual concentration of metals. To them, it might look like the product of volcanic activity. They might never consider that it was the faint, final trace of a long-vanished civilization. After all, when you're not expecting to find something, you rarely see it. We tend to interpret what we find according to the stories we already believe. Our own scientists are trained to think in terms of natural causes, not artificial ones. So even if we have already brushed against the evidence of ancient builders, we may have walked past it without noticing. The problem of evidence is also a problem of imagination. We know how to look for traces of human activity because we know what humans build. We expect roads, walls, tools, and artifacts. But if another kind of intelligence had built cities millions of years ago, their cities might not have looked anything like ours. What if they built primarily out of materials that do not survive? What if their architecture blended seamlessly into natural formations? What if their technology was biological rather than mechanical, leaving behind no durable ruins at all? In that case, even if we stumbled directly on their remnants, we might not recognize them as artificial. We might think we were looking at nothing more than strange geology. There's a quiet humility in realizing this. We often speak of science as though it reveals the whole truth, but science can only reveal what evidence allows, and evidence is selective, fragile, and fleeting. The Earth is not trying to hide her past, but she does not keep it neatly catalogued for us either. She reuses her stones, melts her mountains, scatters her sediments. She is more like an artist endlessly painting over old canvases than a historian preserving a record. To look for cities millions of years old is to look for brushstrokes beneath the layers, faint impressions beneath the paint. And perhaps that is why the idea lingers, even without evidence. It lingers because the absence of evidence does not feel like proof of absence. It feels instead like an invitation to wonder. If we cannot know, then the question remains open, and in that openness lies a kind of beauty. The Earth may be filled with secrets we cannot reach, not because they are locked away, but because time itself has carried them beyond recognition. So when we ask about ancient cities, we are not only asking about others who might have built before us. We are also asking about ourselves, about how fragile our own evidence will be, about how the things we care about most, our stories, our monuments, our technologies, may one day vanish so completely that no trace remains. It is not a frightening thought, but a soft one, a reminder that permanence is not part of Earth's rhythm. Change, transformation, erasure, and renewal, that is the rhythm. And we are simply one verse in the larger song. The problem of evidence is not a wall that prevents us from knowing. It is a mirror that shows us the limits of what can be known. It asks us to live comfortably with uncertainty, to imagine without needing proof, to accept that some stories are too deep for us to recover. And yet, in accepting that, we do not lose the story. We keep it alive in speculation, in myth, in the quiet act of wondering. Perhaps that is the evidence that matters most, not the stones we can measure, but the questions we keep asking. Questions that remind us we are small, temporary, and yet part of something vast, ancient, and filled with mysteries we will never fully solve. Chapter 4. The Silurian Hypothesis. There is a question in science that sounds more like a piece of late-night speculation than a serious study, and yet it has been posed by thoughtful researchers. Could there have been an industrial civilization on Earth long before us? One erased so thoroughly by time that its traces would be almost impossible to find? This thought experiment is often called the Silurian hypothesis. The name itself comes with a touch of whimsy, borrowed from an old science fiction story, but the idea it represents is serious, even unsettling. It asks us to stretch our imaginations across millions of years and to consider what signs, if any, a vanished civilization might leave behind in the geological record. At first, the very suggestion sounds implausible. We are used to thinking of ourselves as the only beings to have built cities, made machines, or reshaped the planet on a grand scale. Our species has been around for only a brief flicker of time, and in that flicker, we have created technologies capable of altering the climate, mining vast amounts of minerals, and scattering synthetic materials across the globe. If such a thing had ever happened before, surely we would know, wouldn't we? Surely the evidence would still be there. But the Silurian hypothesis gently pushes back against that assumption. It reminds us how quickly the Earth forgets. Think again of a city left to crumble. Within centuries it vanishes beneath vines and sand. Within millennia it becomes rubble, then sediment. Given millions of years, it is not rubble anymore but stone, folded and pressed with other stones until the story of it is lost. In geological time, even concrete is temporary. Metal corrodes, glass breaks, plastic disintegrates. Almost nothing survives. And so, the question becomes, if another civilization had come and gone tens of millions of years ago, how would we even know? The hypothesis does not claim that such a civilization existed. Rather, it asks, if it had, what traces would remain? The answer is subtle. Instead of ruins or tools, we would be looking for chemical fingerprints. Perhaps layers in rock showing unusual concentrations of carbon, as though massive amounts of fuel had once been burned. Perhaps traces of synthetic compounds that do not arise naturally, like certain plastics or fertilizers. Perhaps isotopes that suggest unusual activity, like the faint echoes of nuclear reactions. These are the kinds of things that can survive in the record long after physical structures are gone. They are small signs, but they can last. We know this because our own civilization has already left such traces. The thin layer of radioactive isotopes from nuclear testing in the 20th century is likely to endure for millions of years in the rocks. The sudden surge of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from industrial activity is already visible in ice cores and sediments. The production of plastics, though they degrade, may still leave detectable residues in the fossil record. Even if humanity were to vanish tomorrow, some future intelligence could, in principle, notice these anomalies and suspect that something unusual had once taken place here. They might wonder about us the same way we are now wondering about others. The unsettling part of the Silurian hypothesis is not that it proves an earlier civilization existed, but that it shows how easily such a civilization could disappear without leaving obvious ruins. It highlights how fragile our own memory would be over the scale of millions of years. If the Earth can erase mountains, it can certainly erase cities. If entire species that thrived for tens of millions of years are now known only by scattered fossils, what chance would our buildings and artifacts have? The thought is sobering. It reminds us that absence of evidence does not always mean evidence of absence. Sometimes it means only that the Earth is a very good eraser. Still, it is worth noting that science is cautious. Geologists and paleontologists know how to read the record with care. When they study layers of rock, they can detect ancient asteroid impacts, massive volcanic eruptions, and even subtle shifts in climate. They have found no clear evidence yet of anything resembling an earlier industrial civilization. The anomalies we do see, spikes of carbon, layers of rare elements, have natural explanations. A giant asteroid left its signature in the rocks 65 million years ago. Volcanic eruptions have pumped carbon into the air again and again. Ice ages and warm periods have shifted the balance of gases in the atmosphere many times. The record is not silent, but it is noisy, filled with signals from natural processes. To pick out the faint trace of an ancient civilization in all that noise would be very difficult, unless it were unmistakably artificial. But that is part of what makes the hypothesis intriguing. It does not insist, it only invites. It says, look carefully, ask the question, what would you expect to see? Could you tell the difference between an anomaly caused by nature and one caused by a vanished intelligence? And if you could not, might that mean we have already walked past the answer without knowing? There is another layer to this thought, one that feels almost philosophical. The Silurian hypothesis reminds us that we may not be the inevitable peak of Earth's story. We may not even be the first to ask questions about the stars, to shape the land, to leave chemical fingerprints behind. We could be just the latest chapter in a much longer and more complex tale. Perhaps civilizations rise and fall in cycles, each one erased so thoroughly by time that the next begins without any memory of what came before. If that is true, then we are not alone in a vast silence. We are part of a repeating rhythm, one that stretches beyond the boundaries of our knowledge. To imagine this is not to lose comfort. In fact, it may add to it. It suggests that our efforts, our buildings, our questions are not isolated but part of a continuum of attempts. Perhaps every civilization that has ever been has faced the same problem of fragility, the same humbling realization that time will outlast them. And yet they built anyway. They asked questions anyway. They shaped their world in whatever way they could. And now, perhaps, we carry that same torch for a while. The Silurian hypothesis, at its core, is not about proof. It is about humility. It reminds us that the Earth is far older than we can easily picture, and that our place on it is fleeting. It reminds us that memory fades, even the memory of mountains, rivers, and entire species. And it leaves us with the haunting, calming thought that if there were others before us, they too are now part of the stone, part of the silence, part of the mystery beneath our feet. So the next time you hold a rock in your hand, think of it not just as a piece of geology, but as a page in a book, so long we can only ever glimpse fragments of it. Somewhere in those pages might lie the story of forgotten builders, erased but not entirely gone. And even if we never find their signatures, the act of wondering about them connects us to the deep time of the Earth. It reminds us that we are not the whole story, only a line in a chapter, written in dust, soon to be carried away by the turning of the page. Chapter 5. Cities beneath forests. Picture a vast forest stretching as far as the eye can see. The canopy above is so thick that sunlight filters down only in green, trembling fragments. Beneath your feet the ground is soft with centuries of fallen leaves, each one adding a thin layer to the endless carpet of soil. The air smells of moss, damp bark, and the quiet breath of life itself. If you listen closely, you can hear insects humming, birds calling, the faint drip of water from leaves. This feels like the essence of wilderness, untouched and eternal. Yet hidden beneath such forests past and present lie the bones of cities. We know this from our own history. Entire ancient towns, once thriving with markets and temples, have been swallowed by trees and vines. Angkor in Cambodia, once a great capital, vanished beneath centuries of jungle until explorers stumbled upon it again. The Maya cities in Central America, with their pyramids and plazas, disappeared under layers of vegetation so complete that they seemed never to have existed at all. The ruins were always there, but they were disguised, hidden in plain sight by the persistence of the forest. And these are cities only 1,000 years old. Imagine what happens when millions of years pass, when forests rise and fall, when soil thickens into rock. A forest is not a gentle covering. It is a patient force of transformation. Roots pry apart stone, moss eats into surfaces, vines crush walls under their weight. Slowly, year by year, the structures that once stood proud become platforms for new life, and as the decades stack into centuries, the ruins sink deeper. Soil builds up, burying foundations, filling empty spaces, smoothing the sharp lines of architecture into the rounded shapes of hills. Within 1,000 years, the city may be invisible. Within 10,000, it is gone. Within 1,000,000, even the memory of stone is erased, replaced by layers of earth carrying only the faintest whispers of what once was. Now imagine pushing this further. Imagine cities built millions of years ago, swallowed not just by one cycle of growth and decay, but by many. Whole forests would have grown and fallen in layers on top of them. Rivers would have shifted courses, flooding what once was a marketplace, depositing silt, reshaping the land. Glaciers might have swept across, grinding everything into rubble, leaving only polished stone where structures once stood. Plate tectonics could eventually bury it all, drawing the land downward into the crust. What chance would we have of finding even a trace? And yet, the idea lingers. Could there have been cities beneath forests long before ours? If so, they would have been erased so completely that the forest itself now feels timeless, as though it has always been there. Perhaps we mistake wilderness for permanence when in fact it is simply the latest mask. Forests may be guardians of secrets, keepers of layers too deep for us to uncover. Every tree that rises on the forest floor may be growing from the soil of forgotten architecture, roots spreading across what was once someone else's home. There is a strange comfort in this thought. If the earth has already erased entire chapters of civilization beneath her forests, then what we see now, our own cities, our own monuments, are just temporary accents on her surface. We build, we dream, we imagine permanence, but the forest waits patiently. When we are gone, it will return, as it has before. It will creep back over broken roads, push through walls, spread across plazas. It will grow until there is no difference between what was human and what is wild. The line dissolves, and everything is forest once more. Consider how quickly this happens even now. In places abandoned only a few decades ago, such as towns evacuated after disasters, nature has already begun its slow reclamation. Trees grow in the middle of living rooms, birds nest in old offices, vines cover once busy highways until they look like rivers of green. If such transformation is visible in a single lifetime, then what becomes of centuries? What becomes of millennia? The answer is that nothing human-made endures against the rhythm of the forest. Nothing resists forever. And yet, even as the forest erases, it also preserves in its own way. Beneath layers of soil, traces of the past may linger. Charcoal from ancient fires can remain in the ground for tens of thousands of years. Bones can survive if buried quickly enough. Seeds and pollen are pressed into sediment, waiting like whispers to be uncovered by future explorers. So perhaps, if there were cities millions of years ago, some faint shadow of them might still exist in buried soils. But would we recognize it? Or would we simply say it was a layer of unusual sediment, a band of carbon or mineral without story? What fascinates us about cities beneath forests is not only the possibility of their erasure, but the imagery it conjures. To walk through a jungle and imagine towers beneath your feet, hidden under roots and soil, is to feel time folding over itself. It is to sense how thin the present really is, how easily it can be covered and forgotten. When explorers first uncovered Angkor, they described the strange feeling of walking through trees that seemed older than memory, only to find carved faces staring back at them through the vines. What if somewhere beneath a forest much older than that, there are still faces waiting, carved in stone millions of years ago, worn almost to nothing, but still there if someone looked closely enough? And perhaps that is why the thought persists. Not because we have evidence, but because forests themselves feel like guardians of hidden truths. They are dense, mysterious, and layered. They hold stories in their soil, in their rings, in their cycles of growth and decay. They are, in a way, the perfect veil for forgotten cities. Not because they are trying to hide anything, but because their very nature is to transform and to renew. What lies beneath becomes part of them, and in time, indistinguishable from them. If there were once cities beneath forests millions of years ago, we may never know. The earth is patient, and she has had time to write over every trace. But even without proof, the idea has value. It shifts how we see our own world. It reminds us that what we call wilderness is not untouched, it is simply what has come after. It shows us that the forests are not permanent, nor are the cities. They trade places, again and again, in a rhythm older than us. Perhaps that rhythm will continue long after we are gone. Our skyscrapers may crumble, our roads may crack, and the forest will come again, spreading its quiet green over everything. One day, millions of years from now, another intelligence might walk there, among the trees, and wonder what lies beneath. They may never find proof, but they may feel the same haunting curiosity we feel now. A curiosity that whispers, what if there were cities here, long before us, now lost, now forest, now silence? Chapter 6. Ocean Cities. Stand at the edge of the sea for a moment in your imagination. The horizon stretches wide and unbroken, the waves roll in their endless rhythm, and the sound of water fills the air with its patient breathing. To us, the ocean feels eternal, a great unchanging presence. But the truth is, it is one of the most restless forces on Earth. Coastlines advance and retreat, seas rise and fall, islands appear and vanish. What we see today is only a snapshot, a moment in motion, and that invites a thought both haunting and beautiful. What if cities once stood where the ocean now spreads? What if the waves that roll so calmly over the shallows are sweeping above the ruins of something built long before our own time? We know that even in human history, cities have been swallowed by the sea. Ancient ports once bustling with ships now lie beneath shallow waters, their stones toppled and scattered by currents. In places like the Mediterranean, divers have discovered columns, walls and streets preserved below the surface. These are cities only a few thousand years old, lost to earthquakes, floods or the steady creep of the sea. They are reminders that the line between land and ocean is fragile, always shifting. If it happened so easily in our short memory, what might have happened across millions of years? How many coastlines have come and gone? How many lowlands now lie beneath miles of water? The oceans are not just erasers, they are also excellent preservers. Without air, without fire, without constant weathering, things beneath the water can sometimes endure longer than on land. A shipwreck can lie on the seabed for centuries, still recognizable, still carrying artifacts of the people who built it. But over millions of years, even the ocean reshapes. Currents grind, sediments bury, tectonic plates drag seabeds down into the Earth's interior. A city built along a shoreline 50 million years ago would not simply be flooded, it would likely be erased, pulled apart, and hidden under layers of shifting seafloor. And yet, the possibility lingers in the imagination. Imagine walking on the floor of a shallow sea, where shafts of light fall through water and fish dart in and out of shadow. Beneath the sand, perhaps there is more than just rock. Perhaps there are shapes too regular, lines too straight, hints of foundations pressed into the bed. To our eyes it would seem natural, just part of the landscape. But what if in some forgotten age it was a plaza, a road, a gathering place? The ocean, with its vastness, may be the greatest hiding place of all. After all, the majority of our own planet lies beneath water. We often speak of Earth as though it is land with oceans, but it is more truly an ocean with some scattered land. Most of the seabed has never been explored directly. We map it roughly, we know its outlines, but we have not walked across its hidden plains and ridges. If there were ruins there, if there were traces of something ancient beneath the waves, we might never have seen them. They might remain in silence, concealed beneath pressure and dark. Consider how our own future cities might fare. If sea levels rise even a little more, many coastal metropolises will be swallowed. Roads will vanish beneath salt water, towers will crumble in the tides. And once they are gone, the ocean will smooth them, soften their outlines, cover them with silt. A few thousand years from now, no diver would recognize them. A million years from now, they would be untraceable. So if that is the fate awaiting us, why would it not have been the fate of others, if others ever built before us? The ocean is also deeply tied to myth. For as long as we have told stories, we have imagined great cities beneath the waves. Atlantis, the most famous, was said to have sunk into the sea in a single night. Other traditions speak of lands lost to floods, of kingdoms swallowed by rising waters. These myths may simply reflect our ancient fear of the sea's power, but they also echo the reality that the ocean takes back what it chooses. The line between city and sea is thin, and it has been crossed many times. Perhaps our myths are not memories of a single event, but intuitions about a recurring truth. That the ocean is always hungry, and that what we build near it is temporary. To think of cities beneath the sea millions of years ago is to imagine a world we will never fully see. The waters we look at today have covered many lands, and will cover many more. If something was built long before us, the ocean has kept its secret well. We might search for patterns in rock, for unusual formations, for anomalies that seem too precise to be natural, but without context, without proof, we are left only with wonder. And yet, there is a kind of peace in that. The ocean does not need to reveal its past to be beautiful. Its very vastness, its silence, its endless capacity for renewal is enough. If it has cities buried within it, they are not lost in despair but folded into its rhythm. They have become reefs, sandbanks, ridges, the foundations for new life. The ocean forgets and remembers at the same time, always moving, always changing, always holding more than we can ever see. So, the next time you watch the sea, let yourself feel its depth, not just as water, but as time. Imagine the layers of history resting beneath it, stories too deep to recover. And remember that our own cities may one day join that silence, crumbling into salt water, buried under waves, erased by currents. We may never know if others came before us, if their plazas now lie beneath coral reefs or their towers beneath trenches. But in asking the question, we connect ourselves to something vast. We admit that the ocean has always been more than we can measure. It is not just a place of water, but a place of memory, patient and hidden. Perhaps in the end, that is enough. To stand at the edge of the sea, to listen to its slow breath, to wonder what it hides, and to feel both small and comforted. Whether there were once cities beneath its waves or not, the ocean will always hold the power of mystery, and sometimes that mystery is the greatest gift of all. Chapter 7. Underground settlements. When we think of cities, our minds usually travel upward. We picture towers reaching for the sky, walls standing tall, bridges spanning valleys. We imagine skylines rising above the horizon, bathed in light. But what if the first true settlements, whether human or something far older, were not built upward at all, but downward? What if beneath our feet, in the hidden hollows of the earth, civilizations once carved their homes, choosing the darkness over the light? The idea is not entirely foreign. Even in our own history, people have turned to the underground for safety and survival. In the heat of deserts, communities have dug into rock to escape the relentless sunday. In places like Cappadocia in Turkey, vast subterranean cities have been discovered, tunnels and chambers carved into soft stone, large enough to shelter thousands. These were not temporary hideouts, but lasting homes, with storage rooms, kitchens, even ventilation shafts. They remind us that life underground is not only possible, but practical. The Earth's crust provides shelter from storms, from temperature extremes, from enemies above. To live underground is to embrace stability in exchange for sunlight. Now imagine this idea stretched across millions of years. What if the earliest attempts at building cities did not happen on the surface, where erosion and time erase so quickly, but underground, where stone walls can endure longer? If a society had chosen this path, much of its world could still exist, though buried deeply, sealed away by collapses, floods, or shifting earth. We might never know, because the entrances would have long ago vanished. What remains might be indistinguishable from natural caverns, their carved walls smoothed by time until the difference between hand and nature is gone. There is something haunting about the thought of children born underground, never knowing the sky. For them, light would not come from the sun, but from fire, from glowing minerals, from whatever source their people devised. Seasons would be meaningless, replaced by cycles of routine, work, and rest. The sense of space would be shaped not by wide horizons, but by corridors and chambers, by ceilings that press close or open suddenly into vast caverns. Stories might speak not of heavens above, but of dangers that lurked beyond the stone. Perhaps to them the sky would not be a dream, but a terror, an endless open void compared to the safety of walls. Nature already offers examples of life that thrives underground. Entire ecosystems exist in caves, where insects, fish and fungi adapt to eternal night. Some have lost their eyes completely, evolving to sense the world through touch and vibration instead. If creatures can adapt so completely to underground life, why not an intelligent species? Why not a civilization? For them, building settlements beneath the earth might have been the natural choice, not an exception. And yet, the problem of evidence returns. Stone does endure, but only up to a point. Caverns collapse, floodwaters carve away walls, layers of sediment bury what was once open. In time, even the most carefully built chambers could be sealed so thoroughly that we would never know they were there. To find them now would require more than luck. It would require us to recognize faint signs in the rock, to distinguish intention from accident. A wall smoothed by tools might, after millions of years, look exactly like a wall smoothed by water. A tunnel carved by intelligence might resemble a natural fault line. Without context, without artifacts, how would we ever know? Still, the thought lingers, because the underground has always held a strange fascination. From ancient myths of hidden kingdoms like Agartha or Shambhala, to modern stories of lost worlds beneath the surface, we return again and again to the idea that something could be living or once lived below. It is a story that seems to echo across cultures, as if humanity has always sensed that the earth itself holds secrets in its depths. Perhaps these stories are nothing more than imagination, or perhaps they are echoes, faint and distorted, of a truth long buried. What would a city beneath the surface feel like? Imagine walking down a narrow passage, your steps echoing softly. The air is cool and still. You come to a chamber where voices once gathered, where walls may have been painted, where rituals echoed in the dark. The ceiling arches above, carved to hold its weight. In the corners, niches suggest storage, or perhaps shrines. And yet, it is silent. The people who built it are gone, their presence erased, their voices absorbed into stone. All that remains is the shape of intention, softened until it is almost invisible. That is what an underground settlement would become over millions of years, an echo fading into geology. And perhaps that is why the idea feels so mysterious. A city above ground leaves ruins we can stumble upon. A city underground could vanish completely, its doorways sealed, its chambers hidden. If such settlements once existed millions of years ago, they may still be there, locked away beneath our feet, indistinguishable from ordinary rock. The earth is wide, and most of its depths remain unexplored. We drill, we dig, but only in small places, only for resources. The rest remains untouched. Who can say what secrets lie below? Whether or not such underground civilizations ever existed, imagining them helps us see our own fragility differently. It reminds us that survival takes many forms, and that permanence is always relative. We build toward the sky, but our cities will vanish just as surely as any beneath forests or seas. Time is patient, and it does not care whether walls are above ground or below. The earth will reclaim them all. Perhaps, though, there is comfort in this. To imagine underground settlements is to imagine that life, in whatever form, has always searched for ways to endure. It is to imagine that intelligence is not a singular achievement, but a repeated effort, rising and vanishing, leaving behind only hints too faint for us to read. We may never know for certain, but the question itself connects us to something larger. It invites us to feel the depth of time beneath our feet, to picture not just rock and soil, but the possibility of forgotten homes, long buried, long silent, and yet still part of the story of the earth. And so, when you walk across solid ground, remember that it is not only stone, it is also memory, folded and hidden. It may hold more than we will ever uncover, and in that thought, there is wonder, a reminder that the world is deeper than we can imagine, and that the cities we see are only the surface of a story still unfolding far below. Chapter 8. Technology in Disguise. When we look back at our own history, the traces of technology seem obvious. We see stone tools, clay pots, bronze ornaments, iron blades. We see wheels, bricks, bits of writing etched into tablets. Later, we see steel bridges, engines, electricity. These things stand out because they do not look natural. They are shapes and patterns that nature does not make on its own. Yet if millions of years were to pass, how much of this would truly remain? And what if the first technologies of ancient builders were not like ours at all? What if they were made of materials or systems that left almost no trace, blending so seamlessly with the natural world that we would not even recognize them as artificial? This is the quiet puzzle at the heart of imagining civilizations lost in deep time, the possibility that their technologies are not only gone but disguised. When we speak of technology, we often mean machines, things made of gears, metals, plastics, and wires. But technology does not have to look like that. It could be something softer, something alive. Consider how humans have already begun experimenting with biotechnology, engineering bacteria to perform tasks, growing materials that act like plastics or fabrics, shaping living tissue into tools. These things blur the line between artifact and organism. If an ancient civilization had followed that path, their cities might have been made not of stone and metal but of cultivated life forms, woven organisms designed to grow into walls, roofs, and tools. Over millions of years, such creations would not fossilize. They would decompose like any other living thing, leaving behind almost nothing. We would not find ruins, we would find soil. Even more subtly, what if their technology was energy-based rather than material? Imagine a society that learned to harness fields, light, or vibrations in ways we cannot yet imagine. Their cities might not have been made of solid walls at all, but of patterns of controlled energy, shimmering structures that left no permanent mark. To us, that sounds like fantasy. But then again, to someone millions of years ago, our satellites orbiting Earth would sound like fantasy too. If their technologies were ephemeral by design, then no wonder we cannot find them. They would vanish the moment their builders did. There's another way to think about disguised technology. It might be hiding in plain sight. What if something we take for natural is, in fact, artificial? For example, unusual mineral formations, crystals that grow in patterns we assume are geological but which might have once been guided. Or chemical deposits that look like the result of volcanism but could instead be industrial residues, smoothed over by time until they seem ordinary. Our training tells us to interpret these as natural, but that is because we are not looking for the possibility of the artificial. Recognition depends on expectation. If you are not expecting a technology to exist, you may not see it even when it is before your eyes. This thought is unsettling because it implies that we might already have walked past the remnants of an ancient technology without realizing it. Perhaps in museums or in geology labs, samples sit in drawers labeled as natural anomalies, when in fact they are fragments of something once made. Perhaps we have already seen their work but lacked the framework to interpret it. After all, how often in history has humanity mistaken something new for something ordinary? The first radio signals were thought to be noise. The first fossils of dinosaurs were thought to be the bones of dragons. We interpret the unknown through the lens of what we already know. It takes time to expand that lens. The notion of disguised technology also raises questions about how intelligence expresses itself. We assume that the way we build with stone, with metal, with electronics is the natural endpoint of progress. But what if it is only one path among many? A different intelligence might value invisibility over permanence, integration with nature over separation from it. Their greatest technologies might leave no scars at all, blending into the cycles of growth and decay so smoothly that they vanish the moment they are not maintained. Perhaps they would look at our skyscrapers and think them crude, shouting into the world instead of whispering. Perhaps they would see permanence not as achievement, but as arrogance. And yet, there is something calming about this idea. If technology can be disguised so thoroughly that it leaves no mark, then perhaps our own vanishing one day will not be a tragedy but simply a continuation of the same rhythm. Perhaps we too will fade without trace, our machines dissolved, our records erased, our presence reduced to subtle patterns in soil and stone. And maybe that is not failure, but harmony, a return to the flow of the earth, where nothing lasts forever and everything is reused. Think of how quickly even our strongest materials break down. Plastics, which we often fear for their persistence, are not eternal. Given enough time, they fragment, scatter and transform. Metals corrode, buildings collapse. Even the traces we imagine will last our satellites orbiting above. Our carvings in mountains are temporary. Orbits decay. Erosion works endlessly. From the vantage point of millions of years, everything we call enduring is only fleeting. If others built before us with technologies unlike our own, perhaps theirs too were fleeting. Perhaps they left no ruins because their ruins were never meant to be ruins. They dissolved into the Earth's story, becoming part of the background we now walk upon. There is also a strange sense of companionship in this speculation. If we are not the first to build, then we are part of a lineage of builders, each one leaving only whispers behind. We may not find their cities or their tools, but we can imagine them. We can imagine their choices, their materials, their hidden brilliance, and in that imagining we feel connected not just to the past we know, but to the past we can never prove. It is a reminder that history is not only what is written, but also what is lost, disguised, or forgotten. So the next time you see a rock with an unusual pattern, or a mineral that seems too precise, let your mind wander. Don't just see it as geology, see it as possibility. Maybe it is only stone, or maybe it is the last disguised fragment of a technology so different from ours that we would never know it for what it was. The Earth is full of such mysteries, and they may not be mistakes of nature but whispers of something long gone folded into silence. Perhaps that is the greatest gift of this idea. Not certainty, but humility. Not proof, but wonder. The thought that the world may hold secrets we cannot recognize reminds us that we are not at the end of the story, not even close. We are simply one chapter among many, building in our own way, leaving traces that time will disguise, just as it may have disguised others before us. And that, in its own quiet way, is comforting. for it means we are not alone in our impermanence. We are part of a rhythm as old as the earth itself. Chapter 9. The Archaeology of Absence. When we think of archaeology, we imagine discovery. The brushing away of sand to reveal carved stone, the careful lifting of pottery shards, the slow reconstruction of a structure long buried. Archaeology is about what remains, the fragments that endure despite time. But there is another side to it, one less romantic, one quieter, the archaeology of absence. This is the practice not of finding what is there, but of noticing what is missing and asking what that silence might mean. Absence is as much a part of the Earth's story as presence. For every ruin uncovered, there are countless that have vanished entirely. For every fossil that tells us about a creature's shape, there are millions of bodies that decomposed without a trace. Most of life, most of history, is invisible. And when we wonder whether cities might have existed millions of years ago, we step fully into this archaeology of absence. We are asking not what we can hold in our hands, but what might be hidden forever. Think of the layers of Earth like the pages of a vast diary. Some pages are written clearly with fossils, sediments, and chemical signatures that tell us about ancient climates or catastrophic events. But other pages are missing, torn out, smudged, rewritten. Entire chapters are gone, lost to erosion, subduction, or time. We build our knowledge on what remains, but what about the parts that do not? What if the absence itself is a kind of story? Perhaps the blank spaces are not empty at all, but filled with possibilities we can only imagine. Absence can be frustrating because it leaves us with no certainty, but it can also be strangely comforting. It gives us room to wonder. When you look at a cliffside and see layers of stone, you are looking at millions of years stacked together. Some layers hold fossils, others hold only silence. Why? Perhaps nothing lived there, or perhaps what lived there was erased. Absence is not proof of nothing. It is proof that time is powerful, that erasure is just as much a part of history as survival. The archaeology of absence also makes us reflect on our own impermanence. If future beings were to look for us millions of years from now, what would they find? Would they see our skyscrapers and satellites, or only chemical traces in the rocks? Would our ruins endure, or would they vanish, leaving absence as the only testimony of our existence? It is humbling to realize that the odds are against us. Time does not preserve generously. It preserves rarely, selectively. Most of what we leave behind will be gone. Our presence will be known, if at all, through gaps and hints, not monuments. And yet, absence itself is not empty. It is alive with imagination. When archaeologists find a gap in the record, they do not stop. They build hypotheses, they create possibilities, they allow for different stories. In this way, absence becomes a stage for wonder. Perhaps that is the only way we can approach the question of ancient cities. Not with expectation of proof, but with the willingness to let silence speak. Consider myths again. Myths are often born in absence, in the places where no evidence remains. A flood that erases memory leaves behind a story of a great deluge. A vanished land becomes a legend of a sunken kingdom. A people who disappear are remembered in whispers of gods or giants. Myths are ways of filling the gaps, ways of giving presence to what absence has erased. If there were ever cities long before us, perhaps the only way they endure is as faint echoes in myth, repeated in stories across cultures without anyone knowing why. The archaeology of absence also invites us to rethink what counts as evidence. We look for sharp lines, straight walls, artifacts that shout of intention, but perhaps absence itself is evidence. A sudden gap in the fossil record might suggest catastrophe. A chemical spike in rock might suggest activity. These are not ruins we can walk through, but traces we can interpret. They are silences that can be read, if we are willing to listen carefully enough. There is a deep poetry in this. To live with absence is to live with humility. It is to admit that we do not and cannot know everything. It is to accept that most of history is invisible, and that our own lives will one day join that invisibility. But it is also to recognize that absence can be as meaningful as presence. A blank space in a book is not meaningless. It shapes the rhythm of the story. A pause in music is not empty. It gives shape to the notes that follow. In the same way, absence in the Earth's record shapes our understanding of what might have been. So when we ask, what if the first cities were built millions of years ago? We are not really asking for ruins. We are asking whether absence might be holding more than it appears. We are asking whether silence might be layered with forgotten stories, and in a way, the answer is yes. Even if no ancient cities ever stood, the absence itself is a reminder that history is bigger than what we can prove. It is a reminder that most of the Earth's story is hidden, waiting in the quiet spaces we cannot touch. There is comfort in letting that be enough. To accept that absence is part of the pattern, that erasure is natural, that forgetting is as much a part of the Earth as remembering. Our desire for permanence is understandable, but it is not realistic. The archaeology of absence tells us that nothing lasts forever, but also that nothing is ever truly lost. It becomes part of the silence, part of the soil, part of the mystery that others will wonder about in their own time. Perhaps that is the legacy of any civilization, not the ruins it leaves, but the questions it plants. Questions that survive longer than stone, questions that echo in absence, questions that lead others to wonder whether they were alone, or whether they were part of something much larger, stretching across deep time. In that sense, the archaeology of absence is not an ending but a beginning. It invites us to lean closer to silence, to listen for what it might be holding, and to be content with the gentle hum of possibility. Chapter 10. Myths as Memory. All across the world, in stories whispered by firelight, sung in temples, or written in sacred texts, we find tales of lost places, lands swallowed by the sea, golden cities hidden in the mountains, kingdoms that flourished and then disappeared without explanation. To us, these are myths, products of imagination, metaphors wrapped in narrative. And yet, there is a persistent feeling that myths are not only inventions, but might also hold fragments of memory, echoes of something real that has long since slipped away. When we wonder whether cities might have been built millions of years ago, myths take on a new shape. They become not just stories, but possible reflections of deep time, distorted, carried across generations, and delivered to us as riddles. Take Atlantis, perhaps the most famous of these stories. Plato described it as a powerful civilization that vanished beneath the ocean in a single day and night of catastrophe. For centuries, people have debated whether Atlantis was allegory, memory, or prophecy. Was it a parable about arrogance and downfall? Was it a hazy remembrance of a city destroyed by volcanic eruption or flood? Or was it something even stranger, a distant echo of a civilization so old that it has left no trace but story? The lack of evidence does not erase the question. Instead, it deepens it. Atlantis is not alone. From Polynesian tales of sunken islands to the Hindu stories of vanished continents like Kumari Kandam, myths across cultures speak of lands lost to the sea. Could these recurring stories reflect a memory too old for us to verify? It is not only oceans that hold these myths. In the high mountains there are stories of hidden cities. Shambhala, in the Himalayas, a shining kingdom said to be invisible to outsiders. El Dorado, the city of gold, sought by explorers in South America, and countless smaller legends of mountain kingdoms, caves and valleys where ancient beings once lived. Forests too carry myths of lost places, swallowed by vines, left to silence. And deserts hold their own, whispering of cities buried beneath dunes, seen one day and gone the next. What connects them all is the sense of erasure, the idea that something once stood, thrived, and then vanished, leaving only story as proof. Perhaps myths are the archaeology of memory. They are how human beings preserve events when physical traces are gone. A flood story, for example, exists in cultures scattered across the globe. Some say it reflects local floods experienced by ancient peoples. Others believe it echoes the end of the Ice Age, when seas rose rapidly and swallowed coastlines. To those who lived through it, such an event would have felt like the end of the world. The memory of it, passed down for thousands of years, becomes a myth of global flood. If a memory can endure that long, then why not longer? Could it be that some myths reach back not just thousands, but millions of years, carrying fragments of stories so old that we cannot match them with evidence? Of course, myths change as they travel. They are shaped by the people who tell them, reshaped with each generation. A memory of a lost city might become a story of gods punished for their pride. A story of fire from the sky might become a tale of angry spirits or falling stars. What begins as memory becomes metaphor, but metaphor still carries truth, even if it is disguised. Myths are not photographs of the past, but they may be sketches, drawn with imagination and fading ink. The difficulty is knowing how far to trust them. If every culture tells stories of lost civilizations, is that because such places really existed, or simply because human beings everywhere share the fear of loss? Perhaps the repetition comes not from memory but from imagination itself, repeating the same themes because they speak to something universal in us. And yet, even if that were true, it would not take away the wonder. It might even add to it. Because in that case, myths would be evidence not of forgotten cities, but of our deep awareness that all cities are temporary. They would be stories we tell ourselves to grapple with impermanence, to admit that what we build can vanish as surely as what others may have built before us. But let us return to the possibility of memory. Imagine a story told and retold across 100 generations. The details shift, but the core remains, a city that was here, and then it was gone. Now imagine that same story carried not just 100 generations, but thousands or tens of thousands. The language changes, the culture changes, but the image of the city endures. Could such a story survive even longer, carried not by one culture but by many scattered across time? Myths could be the threads tying us to a past we cannot otherwise see, the only surviving remnants of histories erased by Earth itself. And so, when we hear these stories of Atlantis, of Shambhala, of sunken continents, we might pause before dismissing them. We might instead see them as echoes, distorted but meaningful. We may never prove that they describe real civilizations, but they point us toward the same mystery that science gestures at, that Earth has lived many lives, most of which are invisible to us. The myths fill the silence with stories, and in doing so, they remind us that silence does not always mean emptiness. Sometimes it means memory too faint to be understood directly. The role of myth, then, is not only to explain but to keep alive the possibility, to remind us that the past is larger than the evidence we hold, to suggest that beneath the ground, beneath the oceans, beneath the forests, there may be chapters of story we will never recover. Myths may be wrong in detail, but right in essence. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall, and time erases almost everything. What remains is the whisper, the story, the dream that something once stood here before us. In this way, myths are not proof, but they are invitations. Invitations to wonder, to imagine, to listen. They are reminders that memory is not only written in stone but also carried in words, in imagination, in the fragile threads of culture. Even if no ancient cities existed millions of years ago, myths still serve as bridges across time, carrying the weight of absence with grace. They keep us connected to the possibility that we are not the first, only the most recent, to dream of permanence against the flow of time. And perhaps that is the gift of myth as memory. Not certainty, but continuity. Not evidence, but resonance. Myths keep alive the question itself, and in doing so, they give us comfort. They tell us that we are not alone in our curiosity, that countless generations before us also looked at ruins, at oceans, at mountains, and wondered what might lie beneath, what might have come before. To join them in that wondering is to become part of the same story, carried forward into the silence of the future. Chapter 11. Non-human builders. When we imagine ancient cities, we almost always picture them as human creations. Streets lined with familiar dwellings, plazas filled with voices like ours, hands shaping tools and laying stones. But what if the first cities were not built by us at all? What if, in ages long before humanity appeared, another kind of intelligence rose and organized itself into something resembling civilization? The thought is both unsettling and strangely comforting, because it suggests we may not be alone in carrying the burden of imagination and creation. Intelligence does not have to look like us. Already on Earth today we see glimmers of it in other beings. Octopuses, with their quick learning and problem-solving skills, display a curiosity and adaptability that seems almost alien. Dolphins communicate in complex ways, passing cultural behaviors through generations. Birds build intricate nests, sometimes with aesthetic flourishes that suggest more than mere survival. Even ants and termites create structures on a scale that dwarfs their size, cities of soil and tunnels with ventilation, farming chambers, and organized labor. If these are the beginnings of intelligence, Why should we assume humans were the first to cross the threshold into true civilization? Imagine, then, a deep time scenario. Millions of years ago, perhaps during a warm, stable period when ecosystems flourished, another species might have taken that step. It could have been reptilian, perhaps descendants of creatures we think of now only as fossils. It could have been avian, born from the dinosaurs who evolved into birds and survived the Great Extinction. It could even have been marine, building not on land but beneath the oceans, using coral, shell, or living structures to shape environments that met their needs. The possibilities are as wide as the imagination allows, because Earth has hosted countless species, most of which are gone. The difficulty is that we look for familiar signs. We expect stone walls, tools, straight lines, but a non-human intelligence might not build in ways we would recognize. Their cities might have been alive, woven from fungi or coral-like growths. Their tools might have been perishable, shaped from materials that decompose completely. Their records might not have been written but sung or coded in genetic material, leaving no durable trace. What if the very idea of permanence was foreign to them? What if they built for the moment, allowing their creations to dissolve back into the earth, confident that renewal would always follow? In that case, the absence of ruins is not surprising. It is the natural outcome of a civilization that lived in harmony with impermanence. There is something humbling in considering this. We take pride in our skyscrapers and machines, in the sheer scale of what we can build, but perhaps true sophistication lies in building without scarring the world, in leaving behind no ruins at all. A non-human builder might look at us and see a species clinging to permanence, desperate to mark itself on the world, while their own wisdom lay in letting go. Their cities, though invisible now, might have been no less real, no less vibrant. Still, we can let our imaginations wander further. Picture a reptilian civilization in the age after the dinosaurs, filling the warm swamps and forests with settlements. They might have built in patterns inspired by scales, geometry written into their very biology. Picture avian beings constructing cliffside dwellings, soaring towers of woven material designed to catch the wind. Picture cephalopod architects in shallow seas, arranging stones into spirals, cultivating kelp forests as both food and shelter. Each of these images is speculative, but each reminds us of a deeper truth. Intelligence does not belong only to us. It has flickered across many lineages, and perhaps in some cases, burned brighter than we know. The fossil record, as we have said, is incomplete. It preserves bones and shells, but it does not easily preserve culture. A stone tool may survive, but what of a woven net? A bone structure may fossilize, but what of language, or song, or ritual? These vanish completely. So too would the signs of a non-human civilization, unless by accident they left behind something unusually durable, and even then, we may not recognize it. We might walk past a pattern in rock, dismissing it as natural, never realizing it was once intentional. Myths may hold echoes of this too. Stories of serpent gods, bird spirits, and ocean-dwelling beings appear across cultures. We think of them as symbols, but what if they are faint memories of lineages that once lived with intelligence beyond our own? We cannot prove it, and yet the persistence of these motifs across the world is curious. They may be imagination only, or they may be the dim echoes of a truth so old that all other traces are gone. To think of non-human builders is to widen the circle of possibility. It reminds us that civilization is not a destiny reserved for humans alone. It may be a pattern that life on Earth has reached more than once, in different forms, at different times. Perhaps each rise ends the same way, erased by extinction, absorbed into the earth. Perhaps what we call progress is only one of many experiments life has tried. And perhaps, long after us, another will try again. There is comfort here too. If others have built before us, then we are not unique in our striving. We are part of a larger rhythm, one that does not belong to humanity alone. It means we are not alone in our impermanence, not alone in our desire to create, not alone in the silence that follows. It also means that intelligence may not be as rare as we fear. If it has flickered into being before, then perhaps it will flicker again, long after we are gone. So when you imagine the first cities, do not imagine only human hands stacking stones. Imagine claws, fins, feathers, tentacles. Imagine minds different from ours, but hearts no less alive with curiosity, no less driven to gather, to build, to make meaning. Their cities may be gone, disguised, or unrecognizable, but their possibility lingers, quietly, like a shadow across time. To wonder about them is to remember that Earth is not only our home, but a home shared by countless others who came before. Some we know, many we do not, and perhaps among them there were builders, architects of worlds we will never see. Chapter 12. Stone that speaks. There is something about stone that feels eternal. When you run your hand across the surface of a boulder, you are touching a fragment of time itself, weathered and shaped by centuries you cannot see. Stone seems unchanging, patient, immune to the passing of generations. Perhaps this is why so many of our ancestors chose it as the medium for memory. They carved their gods into cliffs, raised their monuments in blocks that dwarfed human strength, aligned their temples with the stars. Even when wood and bone have rotted away, the stones remain, whispering across millennia. If we imagine that civilizations might have existed millions of years before ours, then stone is the place we must look, the one material with even the faintest chance of carrying their voice across the abyss of time. Think of the megaliths scattered across the world, standing stones in Europe, arranged in circles whose meaning is still debated, carved heads on distant islands, watching the horizon, temples cut directly into rock faces, so vast and deliberate that they seem impossible even with modern tools. These sites remind us of how stone endures. Thousands of years of wind and rain have smoothed their edges, but they are still there, still speaking. And if these have lasted for a handful of millennia, what of structures that may once have stood millions of years ago? Would they have survived, or would the patience of the earth have worn them down to nothing? The truth is, even stone yields eventually. Mountains crumble into sand, entire ranges rise and fall over spans of time that dwarf our imagination. A block of stone, no matter how well carved, cannot resist forever. Yet there is a chance, however small, that traces remain, perhaps in caves shielded from the elements, perhaps in regions where erosion is slow, where layers of earth have covered and protected ancient forms, perhaps even in formations we dismiss as natural, where intention has been blurred so thoroughly by time that we no longer recognize it. This raises an unsettling thought. What if we have already seen such stones? What if some formations we label as geological are in fact the last remnants of something built? Straight lines and sharp angles do occur in nature, after all. Columns of basalt rise from cooling lava. Crystals grow in perfect symmetry. Sedimentary layers fracture into patterns that look like walls. Our eyes are quick to classify these as natural phenomena, because that is what we expect. But what if, hidden among them, are stones that once spoke with clarity, now muted by millions of years? Stone speaks in silence, in suggestion rather than declaration. It does not tell us what it was meant to be, it only offers form. A circle of stones might have been a temple, or a calendar, or simply an accident of erosion. A flat surface might be a wall, or just a slab split by pressure. Without context, without supporting artifacts, we cannot know. And so, the archaeology of stone is as much about imagination as it is about evidence. We must look, and then wonder. Consider also that if other civilizations once existed, they may have used stone differently from us. We built monuments and walls, but perhaps they carved labyrinths beneath the ground. Perhaps they raised structures that aligned not with stars, but with the rhythms of the sea or the cycles of the earth itself. Perhaps they shaped stones to harmonize with sound, creating resonant chambers that amplified voices or music. If such places were ever real, their purposes would be almost impossible to recover now. But the stones might still hum faintly with the memory of being touched, being moved, being made to matter. Even if no ancient cities exist in stone, the very fact that we wonder about them shows how deeply we trust the endurance of this material. We instinctively believe that if anything can survive across ages, it will be stone. This is why we bury our dead in it, why we carve our laws into it, why we raise our monuments with it. We are trying to speak across time. We are trying to leave something that can endure beyond us. And perhaps, millions of years from now, some of those stones will still whisper faintly, even if their meaning is lost. Perhaps they will be like the standing stones we already find suggestive, but silent. There is also a deeper poetry here, Stone is not only a medium of memory but also a witness. The cliffs, the mountains, the desert mesas, all of them have seen ages pass. They hold fossils, layers, and scars of events long gone. They are the closest thing the earth has to memory. When you touch a stone, you are touching something older than every city, every story, every life you know. You are touching the silence of deep time. And if civilizations once touched these same stones millions of years ago, their presence is layered invisibly into that silence. Perhaps that is why we are so drawn to stone monuments even today. They feel like messages, not only from other people but from time itself. They remind us that we are small, brief, passing through. They remind us that permanence is relative, that even what feels eternal is slowly changing. And they invite us to imagine who else might have touched these same surfaces before us, who else might have shaped them, who else might have built in stone and left behind whispers too faint for us to hear clearly now. So when we walk through canyons or climb mountains, when we stand among ruins or gaze at strange rock formations, we might pause and listen. The stone is speaking, though not in words. It speaks in presence, in endurance, in suggestion. It tells us that time is vast, that memory is fragile, and that what is forgotten is never truly gone. It is folded into the earth, hidden, but not erased. And perhaps, if the first cities were built millions of years ago, their only surviving voice is in the stones beneath our feet, still speaking softly, still waiting for us to listen. Chapter 13. The reset button of extinction. When we think of extinction, we often imagine tragedy. A species vanishes, a way of life ends, and the world is left quieter for it. The dinosaurs disappear, and with them an age of giant creatures that once ruled the earth. Great forests turn to deserts, coral reefs bleach into silence, whole ecosystems collapse. It feels like a story of loss, of endings. But if we step back and look across the vast sweep of time, extinction is not only loss, it is also renewal. It is the reset button of the earth, clearing the board, opening space for what comes next. And when we wonder about ancient cities, about civilizations erased by time, extinction becomes part of the story. For if there were builders before us, perhaps they too were swept away by one of these resets, leaving behind no trace but the silence that follows. The fossil record shows us that more than 99% of all species that have ever lived are gone. Life is not fragile, but it is impermanent. It shifts, adapts, flourishes, and fades, always making room for the next form. Extinction events mark the moments when the cycle accelerates, when change comes not gradually but suddenly. An asteroid strikes, a supervolcano erupts, the climate tips into chaos. In these moments, life is tested. Some lineages vanish, others adapt, and the stage is cleared for entirely new experiments in existence. Extinction in this sense is not the end of the story but a turning of the page. The most famous reset, of course, is the asteroid that struck 65 million years ago. In an instant, it ended the age of dinosaurs and opened the way for mammals to flourish. Without that catastrophe, we would not be here. The cities we know, the technologies we create, the questions we ask, all of it depends on that one reset. But there have been many others. Mass extinctions ripple throughout Earth's history, each one rewriting the cast of life. The oceans have emptied and refilled, forests have risen and vanished, entire worlds have ended, again and again. Now imagine this process not just as the destruction of species, but perhaps as the erasure of civilizations. If a society had risen millions of years ago, building cities, shaping tools, creating culture, it too would have been vulnerable to the reset. An asteroid does not distinguish between creature and builder, between forest and city. Fire, flood, and ash would erase both equally. Even the traces left behind the ruins, the artifacts would be ground down by the weight of time. The reset button does not only remove life, it removes memory. This thought is haunting but also strangely equalizing. We often think of civilization as something that sets us apart, something that makes us resilient against catastrophe. And yet, the resets remind us that no one is exempt. We are part of the same pattern as every other creature, subject to the same cycles. Our skyscrapers may feel invincible, but they would fare no better against fire and flood than the nests of birds or the burrows of mammals. Extinction does not play favorites. And yet, there is another way to see it. Resets are not only endings but invitations. Each extinction event has been followed by explosions of new life, new creativity, new forms of intelligence. The asteroid that erased the dinosaurs did not only destroy it, made space for us. And perhaps the same could be true for others. If ancient civilizations once existed, perhaps their disappearance created the conditions for our emergence. Perhaps every reset carries within it not just loss, but possibility. It is also worth noticing that life is remarkably persistent. Even in the harshest catastrophes, some form of life endures. After the asteroid impact, after the volcanic winters, after the ice ages, life continued. Tiny creatures in the soil, hardy plants, simple organisms in the oceans, these always survive. From them, the story begins again. And in time, from those small survivors, new complexity arises. If civilization has happened once, it may happen again. If it has happened more than once, it may be part of the rhythm itself. To think of extinction as a reset is to shift how we see our own place in time. We are not immune to it. We too may face resets, whether from our own choices or from forces far beyond our control. But we are also part of something larger, a cycle that has been unfolding for billions of years. If we vanish, it will not be the end. It will be the beginning of something else, something new that grows in the space we leave behind. And perhaps that has already happened many times before. Perhaps we are only the most recent in a long sequence of civilizations, each one rising, each one erased, each one replaced. There is a kind of comfort in this view. It removes the fear of endings and replaces it with continuity. It says that nothing is permanent, but nothing is wasted either. The ashes of one world become the soil of another. The silence after extinction is not empty, it is pregnant with possibility. And if the first cities were built millions of years ago, erased by one of these resets, then their legacy may not be in ruins or artifacts, but in the space they opened for us to come. When you walk through a forest, notice the fallen trees. They look like loss, but they are also beginnings. Their trunks become homes for insects, mosses, fungi. Their decay feeds the soil that nourishes new growth. Extinction works the same way, only on a larger scale. It is the forest of the earth itself, turning, recycling, renewing. Civilizations too may fall like trees, but even their fall may nourish what comes after. So perhaps the question is not whether civilizations have been lost to extinction, but how many? How many times has life reached upward into intelligence, only to be reset? How many times has the earth cleared her stage, not cruelly, but simply because that is her way? We will likely never know, but the possibility is enough. It reminds us that we are part of something vast, a cycle that erases but also renews. And in that cycle, there is no final loss. There is only transformation. Extinction is not the silence of nothing. It is the pause before the next song. It is the reset button, pressed again and again, shaping the long, mysterious rhythm of life on Earth. Chapter 14. Signs in the rocks. When you walk along a cliff or a canyon wall, it is easy to see the layers of time stacked before you. Bands of colour, some light, some dark, each one representing ages long gone. To most of us, they are only pretty patterns in stone, but to geologists they are chapters, written in a language of minerals and fossils. Within those layers are stories of rivers that once flowed, seas that rose and fell, forests that grew and vanished. Sometimes there are sudden lines, thin but unmistakable, that mark catastrophe. A layer of ash from a volcanic eruption, a band of iridium left by an asteroid impact, a sudden shift in carbon that tells of climate change. These signs in the rocks are the closest thing we have to memory written by the Earth herself. And when we wonder whether cities might have been built millions of years ago, this is where we must look. If they left any mark at all, it would be here, in the stone. Rocks are not storytellers in the way we expect. They do not give us sharp images or clear words. They give us hints, patterns, puzzles. A spike in carbon dioxide might mean volcanic eruptions, or it might mean massive burning of biomass. Could it also mean the industrial activity of a long-lost civilization? Perhaps. But it is hard to separate such a signal from the countless natural processes that mimic it. A line of radioactive isotopes might suggest nuclear reactions, but the Earth itself creates radioactive minerals. Without context, we We cannot know whether we are seeing nature or something intentional. The signs are there, but their meanings are slippery. Already, scientists have identified strange anomalies in the record: spikes of heat, odd concentrations of certain elements, mysterious gaps in the fossil record. These all have natural explanations, but sometimes the line between natural and artificial is thinner than we imagine. The Earth is perfectly capable of producing what looks like artifice. A canyon wall can look like a fortress. A crystal cave can look like a cathedral. A sudden shift in carbon can look like the breath of industry. We interpret them as natural because that is what we expect. But what if, among them, there are real whispers of something else? This is the essence of the so-called Silurian hypothesis, the thought experiment that asks whether an earlier industrial civilization would be detectable at all. Its conclusion is humbling. Only faint chemical traces might remain, and even those could be indistinguishable from natural processes. The signs in the rocks are ambiguous by nature. They do not give certainty, only suggestion. That is why, if there were ancient cities millions of years ago, we should not expect to find their ruins. We should expect only whispers, buried in layers of stone, impossible to confirm. And yet, isn't that part of the beauty of it? The ambiguity invites imagination. Every band of rock you see, every ripple in stone might be telling a story deeper than you realize. The cliff you walk past casually might hold the memory of forests, floods, or perhaps even civilizations, all folded into its silent lines. The Earth has kept these records not for us, but simply because that is her way. She writes in stone, endlessly, patiently, without concern for who will read it. It is worth remembering, too, that we are already leaving our own marks in the rocks. The surge of carbon from our burning of fossil fuels is now part of the sedimentary record. The thin layer of radioactive isotopes from nuclear testing will endure for millions of years. The plastics we scatter may degrade, but their chemical residues will linger in soils and sediments. Millions of years from now, long after our buildings are gone, these will remain as signs in the rocks. And if someone else, far in the future, looks for us, they will find us there, not in monuments, but in thin lines and faint traces, written in the Earth's diary. This realization brings humility. For all our ambition, for all our belief in permanence, what survives of us may be no more than a faint chemical shadow. If that is all we leave, then why would it not have been the same for any civilization before us? Why should we expect to find towering ruins when even we will not leave them? The signs in the rocks may be the only form of memory strong enough to reach across such spans of time. But there is also comfort here, to know that the Earth does remember, in her own quiet way, to know that even if we vanish, some trace of us will remain, folded into the stone, waiting for someone to wonder. The rocks are not loud in their storytelling, but they are persistent. They carry the memory of fire, of flood, of change. They carry the memory of life and its endless transformations. And perhaps they carry memories of builders before us, faint and uncertain, but still there, if only we knew how to listen. So, the next time you stand before a cliff face, let your eyes trace the lines. See them not as empty patterns, but as sentences, written in the slowest language imaginable. Imagine the possibilities hidden within them, the forests, the creatures, perhaps even the cities that are gone. The rocks will not answer you directly, but they do not need to. Their silence is not emptiness. It is an invitation, a space for imagination to enter. The signs in the rocks are all we have, and perhaps all we need. They remind us that the Earth is old, that time is vast, and that memory does not vanish, it only changes form. They remind us that even if the first cities were built millions of years ago, their story is not entirely gone. It is still here, beneath our feet, folded into stone, waiting for us to pause, to wonder, and to listen. Chapter 15. If we disappeared, imagine, just for a moment, that tomorrow every human being vanished. No warning, no slow decline, just absence. The cities remain, the machines remain, the libraries, the satellites, the roads, the bridges. All of it is still here. But us? Gone. What happens then? How long would our world of steel, glass and concrete last without us to tend it? And perhaps more hauntingly, if millions of years passed, what would remain for anyone to find? Would the story of humanity still be visible? Or would it dissolve so completely that we would be forgotten, just as we suspect others may already have been? The first days would be quiet, Trains would stop on their tracks, airplanes would sit motionless at their gates, lights would flicker out as power stations shut down without care. The world would suddenly be filled with silence, broken only by wind, water, and the calls of animals rediscovering space once crowded by us. Then, slowly, nature would begin its reclamation. Vines would climb walls, grass would crack through pavement, rivers would spill over barriers we built to contain them. The transformation would be subtle at first, but relentless. Within 100 years, many buildings would already be crumbling. Glass would shatter, steel would rust, concrete would split as roots pushed their way through. Entire neighborhoods would vanish beneath forests. Highways would be buried in weeds. Our monuments, so carefully built, would be reduced to ruins. Some structures might endure longer: the pyramids, certain stone temples, perhaps Mount Rushmore's carved faces, but even these would not resist forever. The earth is patient. She wears everything down. Within 10,000 years, nearly all traces of us on the surface would be gone. Forests and deserts would stretch where cities once stood. Mountains would continue to rise. Rivers would carve new paths. The oceans would shift, swallowing coastlines and exposing new land. In that span of time, the ruins of New York or Tokyo or Cairo would be no more visible than the ruins of any forgotten village in the jungle today. Perhaps a few fragments might endure in caves or deserts, where weathering is slower, but most would be gone. And then comes the thought that makes the imagination tremble. Millions of years. Over such spans, continents drift. Ice ages advance and retreat. Mountains rise and erode into plains. Entire landscapes change until they are unrecognizable. Whatever faint ruins might remain after 10,000 years would be erased entirely by 1,000,000. Our presence, once so loud, would dissolve into silence. Future beings, if they arose, would walk the earth and see only stone, soil, rivers, and forests. They would not know us by sight. They would only guess that we had ever been here. And yet, just as we search for signs of ancient builders, they might search for us. They might dig into rocks and find thin lines of unusual chemicals, the carbon surge from our burning of fossil fuels, the radioactive isotopes from our weapons tests. They might find layers of plastic residues, tiny but persistent, pressed into sediment. To them, these would be the signs of something unusual, something that hinted at a civilization now gone. They would not find our towers or our books, but they might still find whispers in the rocks. This reflection is humbling. We often imagine that our works will endure forever, that the world will always remember us. But the truth is, memory in stone is rare and fragile. The earth is not a museum. She is an artist who paints over her own canvas again and again. We will be erased, as others before us may have been erased. Our story, like theirs, will be folded into silence. And just as we wonder now whether others built before us, so too might future beings wonder whether we ever existed. But there is also comfort in this thought. To be forgotten by the earth is not failure. It is part of the rhythm of time. Nothing is meant to last forever, not even civilizations. Our value lies not in permanence but in presence, in the fact that we lived, built, dreamed, and asked questions. Even if we vanish, those questions will have mattered. They will have shaped us. And the silence that follows will carry the echo of our being, even if no one hears it. Consider too that we may not be alone in this cycle. Perhaps others have already disappeared in just this way, their cities erased, their voices silenced, their memory reduced to faint chemical traces. We wonder about them now, and perhaps in the far future, someone will wonder about us. In this way, forgetting becomes a form of connection. We are not the only ones to vanish. We are part of a lineage of impermanence, each chapter erased, each chapter whispered about by the next. To imagine our disappearance is not to surrender to despair, but to step into perspective. It reminds us how brief we are, how fleeting even our greatest works will be. It reminds us that time is vast, and we are small, but it also frees us. If nothing lasts forever, then our task is not to cling to permanence, but to live fully in the moment we have. To build not because it will endure, but because it matters now. To wonder, to love, to create, even if all of it is destined to vanish. If we disappeared, the earth would continue, the forests would return, the seas would rise and fall, new species would emerge, and perhaps new intelligences. They might walk the ground we once called home, unaware of our presence. Or perhaps they would sense us, faintly, in signs too subtle to be sure. Either way, life would go on. The story would continue, and we would become part of the background, part of the silence that shapes the next verse. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough. To have lived, to have asked questions, to have built our brief cities against the vastness of time that is our gift. Even if we are erased, the wonder we carry is real. The imagination we bring to the world is real. And even in our absence, the earth will remember us in her own way, in lines written in stone, in whispers folded into the deep time of her memory. Chapter 16. The idea of cycles. When we step back from the immediacy of our own time, it becomes easier to see that history does not move in a straight line. It circles. Empires rise, and then they fall. Technologies flourish, and then they are forgotten, only to be rediscovered centuries later. Even ideas about the stars, about the earth, about ourselves, seem to appear, vanish, and then return again in new forms. This pattern is not only human, it belongs to life itself. Forests grow, burn and grow again. Rivers change course and then, in time, return to their old paths. The seasons repeat, day follows night, cycles are everywhere. And when we wonder about the first cities, about civilizations lost to the deep past, it may be useful to see them not as singular anomalies, but as part of this great rhythm, the possibility that civilizations, too, may follow cycles of rise, fall, and return. In our own history, the evidence is clear. Rome rose with its legions, roads, and aqueducts stretching across continents. For centuries it seemed eternal, but then it fractured, crumbled, and was gone. Its ruins remained, but its knowledge scattered. Later, in the Renaissance, many of those same ideas and technologies were rediscovered, as if history itself had circled back, allowing what was lost to bloom again. This is not an isolated case. Many cultures have stories of golden ages, times of flourishing that ended in decline, followed by rebirth. The cycle of creation and collapse is as much a part of human civilization as breathing is to the body. If this is true for us, why not for civilizations across greater spans of time? Perhaps intelligence, too, follows cycles. Perhaps it is not rare but inevitable, always emerging, always disappearing, only to emerge again in another form. It may be that civilizations are not unique events but recurring waves, rising whenever the conditions allow, erased when catastrophe strikes, and rising again later. The Earth may be far older in her stories of builders than we imagine. We may simply be the most recent crest in a wave that has been repeating for millions of years. Cycles can be difficult for us to accept because we like to believe in progress as a straight line. We tell ourselves that humanity has advanced steadily from caves to computers, from fire to flight. But in truth, much has been lost along the way. Libraries burned, inventions forgotten, entire cultures erased. The line is not straight, it is broken, curved and folded. If we zoom out further, across not just thousands but millions of years, the cycles may be even more dramatic. Civilizations might rise, disappear completely, and be forgotten. Later, another might rise, unaware that it is not the first. There is something both haunting and comforting in this thought. Haunting, because it suggests that no civilization is truly safe from collapse. Comforting, because it suggests that even if we fall, the pattern does not end. Life will continue, intelligence will reappear, the cycle will turn again. What is lost is not truly gone, but simply waiting to return in another form. The natural world shows us this constantly. Forests after fires may look dead, blackened and silent, but soon shoots of green push through the ash. Lakes that dry up may later refill. Extinctions may clear the stage, but new forms always step forward. The earth is not static, she is cyclical. And if civilizations are part of life's story, they must be cyclical too. The first cities, if they existed millions of years ago, may have followed this same rhythm, rising, falling, and leaving space for us to rise in turn. This idea also changes how we see ourselves. If we are only one cycle among many, then permanence is not the measure of our worth. We do not need to last forever to matter. What matters is that we are part of the rhythm, part of the unfolding pattern of life. Our cities, our stories, our questions, they are not final, but they are real, and they are part of a greater whole. Perhaps the greatest illusion is the belief that we are the first or the last. In truth, we may be neither. We may only be one note in an endless song. Cycles also remind us to be humble. When we look at ruins, we see evidence of collapse, but we also see evidence of resilience, of the ability to rebuild. Our own future may one day be ruins too. But even then, the cycle will not end. Perhaps others will rise, long after us, and they too will ask the same questions. Were we the first? Were we alone? What lies beneath the silence of time? And in their asking, the cycle of wonder will continue, unbroken. There is peace in this vision. It tells us that even in collapse, there is continuity. Even in erasure, there is renewal. The cycle is not cruel. It is simply the way of things. Just as waves return to the shore, just as the sun returns to the horizon, civilizations return in new forms. The first cities may have risen and fallen long ago. Ours may one day fall too. But the rhythm goes on, carrying the story forward, again and again, into the deep future. So, the next time you see ruins, or watch the turning of the seasons, let yourself feel that rhythm. Let yourself imagine not a single line of history, but a great circle, wide and enduring. We are part of it now, just as others may have been before us, just as others may be after us. The cycle is larger than us, larger than any city, larger than any civilization. And perhaps, in that vast circle, there is a kind of immortality not for us as individuals, but for life itself, always renewing, always remembering through its patterns, always beginning again. Chapter 17. Time as a curtain. There is a quality to time that feels like distance, as though the past were a faraway land we can walk toward but never fully reach. We glimpse it through the artifacts we uncover, the bones, the stones, the layers of earth. But no matter how many discoveries we make, there is always more hidden behind the curtain of time. We pull it back slightly, and we see fragments. We lean closer, and we imagine what might lie just beyond. But the curtain is never fully lifted. It hangs between us and the ages that came before, soft yet impenetrable, allowing only shadows to filter through. Think of how thin that curtain is for recent history. We can still hear voices recorded a century ago. We can still read letters written by hands that lived not so long before our own. Even here, the curtain distorts, the voices crackle. The handwriting fades, but we can still reach through and feel connection. Yet as the centuries pile into millennia, the curtain thickens. Whole languages vanish. Civilizations become anonymous ruins. The voices fall silent, and the curtain grows heavier. By the time we reach millions of years into the past, the curtain is nearly opaque. All we see are hints, fossils pressed into stone, chemical shifts in ancient sediments, strange patterns carved by forces we do not fully understand. Beyond that, it is imagination that carries us. This is where the question of ancient cities becomes most alive. If there were civilizations long before us, they would be hidden entirely behind this curtain. Time would have folded them away so thoroughly that only faint shadows could remain, and even those may be indistinguishable from natural patterns. The curtain is both eraser and protector. It hides the past from us, but it also ensures that the earth is never empty of mystery. There will always be something beyond our reach, something just out of sight, inviting us to wonder. Curtains, of course, are not solid walls. Light passes through, shadows move. Sometimes the fabric parts just enough to suggest a form. That is what time gives us suggestions. A sudden extinction event hints at catastrophe. A layer of minerals hints at a flood or fire. A myth of a vanished land hints at memory disguised as story. None of these are full revelations. They are glimpses, silhouettes on the other side of the fabric. We cannot step through, but we can imagine. And in that act of imagination, the curtain itself becomes part of the experience, shaping how we see. There is a certain gentleness in this. If time were fully transparent, if we could see everything clearly, perhaps the wonder would be less. Mystery deepens our connection. The not knowing keeps us awake, keeps us humble. When we ask, what if the first cities were built millions of years ago, we are really acknowledging the curtain itself. We are admitting that most of history is hidden, and that the silence between the fragments we do know is just as meaningful as the fragments themselves. It is worth noticing that we live behind a curtain too, not only the curtain of the past, but but the curtain of the future. We cannot see what comes next any more than we can see what came before. We can imagine, we can predict, but the fabric is the same, opaque, soft, refusing certainty. Just as the past leaves us with absence, the future leaves us with possibility. The curtain hangs on both sides of the present, enclosing us in a narrow strip of visibility. That is what it means to be alive, to exist in this moment, between curtains, always aware of what we cannot see. Sometimes, though, the curtain thins, fossils lift a corner, myths part the fabric, sudden discoveries shine like light through the weave. For a moment, the hidden world feels close. We see the teeth of a creature long extinct, the walls of a city once forgotten, the traces of fire from a hearth tended tens of thousands of years ago. In these moments, the curtain is not fully gone, but it is lessened. We are reminded that the past is real, not only an abstraction, something lived, breathed, built, and dreamed before us. And then the curtain closes again, leaving us with silence and wonder. If the first cities truly were built millions of years ago, then the curtain of time has hidden them almost perfectly. But perfect does not mean empty. The curtain may cover, but it also preserves. Somewhere, deep beneath layers of rock, there may still be shapes, fragments, whispers of intention. Whether or not we ever uncover them is another question. Perhaps we will not. Perhaps the curtain will never lift that far, but perhaps it does not need to. Perhaps the presence of the curtain itself is the point to remind us that mystery is endless, that time is vast, that the story is always larger than what we can see. When you look at a distant mountain through morning mist, the mountain is not gone, it is only veiled. Time is like that mist. It softens the edges, hides the details, but leaves just enough shape for us to imagine what lies beyond. And just as the mountain feels more beautiful for being half hidden, the past feels more alive because it is veiled. The curtain gives it depth, gives it weight, gives it wonder. So perhaps we should not see the curtain of time as an obstacle, but as a companion. It travels with us, always reminding us that life is not about certainty but about curiosity. It invites us to lean closer, to listen more carefully, to imagine more deeply. Whether or not ancient cities lie beyond it, the act of asking the question keeps the curtain alive, keeps us engaged with the mystery. The past may never fully reveal itself, but the curtain ensures that the story will never end, that there will always be something more to wonder about. And in that way, time's curtain is not a barrier but a gift. It allows us to walk through life knowing that behind every silence, behind every shadow, there is more than we can see. It allows us to feel small, yes, but also connected to the past, to the future, to the endless rhythm of existence. To stand before the curtain is to stand before mystery itself, and to accept that the greatest beauty is not in the answers, but in the questions that remain. Chapter 18. Lessons from the hypothesis. Speculation can feel like drifting. It has no anchor, no certainty, only questions that spread out like ripples on a pond. And yet, speculation can also serve as a mirror. When we ask if the first cities might have been built millions of years ago, when we wonder about civilizations erased by time, we are not only talking about the past, we are also talking about ourselves. The hypothesis becomes a way to look inward, to see our own fragility and our own assumptions more clearly. It is less about proving what was, and more about learning how to live with what is. One of the first lessons this kind of speculation offers is humility. It reminds us that our presence on Earth is brief, a flicker in a much longer story. We like to imagine that we are unique, the pinnacle of evolution, the only ones who have ever built cities and dreamed of permanence. But if it is even possible that others have risen before us, then our uniqueness is softened. We are not the first, perhaps not even the most remarkable. We are part of a larger pattern, one that has unfolded many times across the ages. That thought does not diminish us. It places us within something greater. It teaches us that our greatness lies not in being first or last, but in being part of the rhythm at all. Another lesson is about impermanence. To ask whether earlier civilizations might have vanished without trace is to realize that ours can vanish just as easily. Our skyscrapers, satellites, and machines may feel indestructible, but they are as vulnerable as any other creation when measured against the patience of time. Forests can reclaim cities in decades. Oceans can swallow coasts in centuries. In 1,000,000 years, almost nothing we build will remain. This is not a reason for despair, but a call to perspective. We are not here to outlast the Earth. We are here to live within her, briefly, beautifully, aware that our permanence is an illusion. The hypothesis also teaches us to think differently about evidence. We are accustomed to looking for ruins, artifacts, and monuments as proof of existence, but deep time erases these things quickly. If others did build before us, their traces would be subtle, faint chemical signatures, unusual mineral deposits, anomalies in rock layers. That means absence is not proof of non-existence, it is only proof of time's power. This realization can change the way we see not just ancient history, but our present world as well. It teaches us to pay attention to the quiet, to the small, to the hidden. It reminds us that truth does not always shout, it often whispers. There is also a lesson about imagination itself. When we allow ourselves to wonder about cities beneath oceans or civilizations erased by extinction, we are practicing a kind of openness. We are admitting that we do not know everything, that our perspective is limited, that the universe is larger than our explanations. This openness is valuable, not just for science but for life. It keeps us curious, it keeps us humble, it keeps us from believing that our current understanding is the final word. And in a world that changes constantly, curiosity may be our greatest survival tool. We can also learn resilience from this thought experiment. If others have risen and fallen before us, then collapse is not the end of the story, it is part of the cycle. Our own civilization may one day be erased, our memory reduced to faint traces in stone, but life will continue. Perhaps intelligence will rise again, perhaps cities will be built again, perhaps questions will be asked again. The lesson is that endings are not absolute, they are transformations. We do not need to fear the silence of the future, because it is simply the soil for something new. At a more personal level, there is a lesson in humility toward time itself. The earth does not rush. She builds mountains and erodes them away. She grows forests and burns them down. She gives rise to species and then takes them back. All of this unfolds over spans of time so vast that our entire history barely registers. To live with this awareness is to live more gently, more patiently. It is to see our own struggles in perspective, to recognize that the urgency we feel is real but not ultimate. Time is larger than us, and in that largeness there is calm. The hypothesis also teaches us about silence. Silence does not mean emptiness. Just because we have no proof of ancient cities does not mean they never existed. And just because we cannot always hear meaning in our own lives does not mean meaning is absent. Sometimes, silence itself is the message. Sometimes what is missing speaks as powerfully as what is present. Learning to sit with silence, to listen without demanding answers, may be one of the most profound lessons we can carry from this speculation. There is even an ethical lesson hidden here. If our traces will be so easily erased, then perhaps what matters most is not what we leave behind, but how we live while we are here. Our responsibility is not to build monuments against time, but to build relationships within it, to treat the earth and each other with care. If our story is temporary, let it be remembered not in stone but in kindness, in the way we move gently through the world, knowing that permanence is not ours to claim. Ultimately, the greatest lesson may be about wonder itself. We may never know if ancient cities once stood millions of years ago. The curtain of time may never lift that far, but the act of asking, of imagining, of leaning into the mystery that is valuable in its own right. It keeps us aware that life is larger than us, that history is deeper than we can see, that the earth is full of secrets. Wonder is not a weakness, it is the beginning of wisdom. So the hypothesis does not need to be true in order to matter. Its truth lies in what it teaches us now, in the present. It teaches humility, impermanence, openness, resilience, patience, and wonder. These are the lessons that endure, even if the civilizations themselves are gone. To ask, what if, is to step into a larger perspective, one that makes our lives feel both smaller and more meaningful at the same time. And perhaps that is the most enduring gift of all, to see ourselves as part of something vast, fleeting but beautiful, temporary but meaningful, fragile but luminous. Whether or not there were cities before us, we can learn to live more gently, more curiously, and more fully in the brief moment that is ours. Chapter 19. The Comfort of Mystery. There is a temptation, when faced with questions, to search endlessly for answers. We want certainty, proof, clarity. We want to lift the veil, to point to something and say, this is what happened. Yet the deeper we look into the past, the more we realize how much is hidden, how much is silent, how much we will never know. For some, this is frustrating, even unsettling, but there is another way to see it. Mystery itself can be a kind of comfort. The fact that the earth still holds secrets, that time keeps its stories folded away, gives our lives a softness that certainty could never provide. When we walk among ruins, part of their beauty lies in what we cannot explain. We see walls whose purposes are lost, carvings whose meanings we cannot decode, alignments with the stars whose intention we only guess at. We fill the silence with speculation, and in doing so, we connect not just to the builders but to the mystery itself. If every question had an answer, the world would feel smaller. It is the unanswered questions that give the world its depth, like shadows that make the light richer. This is especially true when we imagine ancient civilizations long before our own. If we knew for certain that they existed, or knew for certain that they did not, the mystery would be resolved, but something would be lost. What gives the question its power is precisely that we cannot answer it. The silence of deep time becomes an open field where imagination can wander, where humility can grow, where wonder can find space. The mystery is not a problem to solve, it is a presence to live with. There is comfort in knowing that the earth is larger than our explanations. We may map, measure, and categorize, but there will always be layers beyond our reach. The oceans still hold unexplored depths. The rocks still hold unread lines. The stars above still burn with unanswered questions. We are surrounded by mystery on all sides, and this is not a failure of knowledge, it is the nature of existence. To live in mystery is to live in reality, because the world is not meant to be fully grasped. It is meant to be encountered with awe. Mystery also frees us. If we do not know everything, then we are free to imagine, to tell stories, to lean into the unknown. Myths, after all, are born in the spaces where certainty ends. They are not lies, but ways of living with mystery. They carry memory, possibility, and meaning in forms that facts alone cannot. When we listen to myths of lost cities or vanished kingdoms, we are not listening for literal truth. We are listening for the resonance of mystery, the comfort of knowing that even in the absence of evidence, the imagination still has work to do. In this way, mystery is generous. It allows each person to see differently, to shape the silence with their own wonder. For some, ancient cities might be a metaphor for human fragility. For others, they might be a genuine possibility waiting to be uncovered. For still others, they might be stories that reflect our deepest fears and hopes. The mystery makes room for all of these at once. It does not demand one answer. It allows many. There is also a gentle humility in realizing that mystery is not something we will ever outgrow. Even if we learned every secret of the earth, the universe would still stretch beyond us. Even if we mapped every star, questions of what lies beyond would remain. Even if we uncovered every fossil, every ruin, every layer of rock, we would still not know everything. The curtain of time and space is infinite. There will always be more to wonder about. This means that mystery is not temporary, it is eternal. And to accept this is to find peace. Perhaps the greatest comfort of mystery is that it makes life feel alive. Certainty is static, but mystery moves. It invites us forward, deeper, wider. It reminds us that we are participants in a story we cannot fully read, that our role is not to solve it, but to live within it. To ask questions, to imagine possibilities, to marvel at what we do not understand, that is the gift of being alive. Mystery ensures that the world will never run out of wonder. When we imagine cities millions of years old, we are stepping into that wonder. We know we will never have proof. We know the question will never be fully answered. But the act of imagining opens us to something larger. It reminds us that time is vast, that memory is fragile, that the earth is layered with secrets. And in that reminder, there is comfort. For it means that life is not flat or simple. It is rich, textured, and full of depths we will never exhaust. So the next time you find yourself staring at the horizon, or at the stars, or at the silent stones of an old ruin, let yourself feel the presence of mystery. Do not try to solve it. Simply let it be. Feel the comfort of knowing that the world is larger than you, that the past holds more than you can see, that the future is still unwritten. Mystery is not emptiness. It is fullness beyond comprehension. It is the quiet hum of existence itself, inviting you to listen, and perhaps that is the most enduring truth of all. Whether or not ancient cities once stood long before us, the mystery of them continues to shape us. It teaches us humility, imagination, and patience. It offers us comfort not in answers, but in questions. And it reminds us that we are not meant to grasp everything, but to marvel at the vastness that holds us. In mystery, we are not lost. We are home. Chapter 20. The Quiet Echo. When the last question has been asked, and the last speculation drifts into silence, what remains is not certainty, but something softer, a quiet echo. It lingers in the mind long after the words themselves fade, like the hush that follows a bell. This echo is the reminder that even in the absence of answers, wonder itself is enough. To imagine the first cities built millions of years ago is not to insist upon their reality, but to let ourselves feel the vastness of time and the smallness of our place within it. The echo is not proof, but presence. It is the sense that, somewhere in the folds of the Earth's memory, something may be waiting, and even if it is not, the act of wandering connects us to it all the same. We have wandered through forests that cover ruins, oceans that may conceal entire worlds, underground caverns where builders could have hidden their lives, and stone monuments that whisper across ages. We have stepped into myths and stood before the curtain of time, knowing it will never fully part. We have considered extinction as a reset, rocks as memory, cycles as the rhythm of life. And each step, each possibility, has not given us certainty, but has instead opened a deeper awareness of the mystery that surrounds us. The echo is this awareness. It does not shout. It hums, quietly, at the edges of thought, reminding us that not everything can or should be solved. There is comfort in ending with an echo rather than an answer. An answer closes the door, it seals the story. But an echo keeps the door open, keeps the story alive, keeps us listening. We will never know whether the first cities were built long before us, whether they were erased by forests, swallowed by oceans, buried in stone, or erased by extinction. But the question itself does not need resolving. Its power lies in the way it invites us to see differently, to see our own civilization not as inevitable, but as fragile, to see time not as a straight path, but as a vast ocean, to see silence not as emptiness, but as fullness beyond comprehension. Perhaps this is the greatest gift of the thought experiment. It turns our attention back to the present. If everything fades, if even great civilizations vanish, then what matters is not permanence but presence. The cities we live in now, the lives we lead, the questions we ask, these are our moment's echo. We will not last forever, but we are here now. We are part of the same earth that has held countless lives before us and will hold countless more after us. To know this is to be humbled, but also to be comforted. We are not alone in our impermanence. We are part of a rhythm that stretches across deep time. The echo also connects us forward. Someday, perhaps, others will walk this earth. They may not know us, may not find our ruins, may not even guess at our existence. But they may pause before a cliff face, see a faint line in the rock, and wonder. In their wondering, they will echo us, just as we echo those who may have come before. In this way, the chain of curiosity is unbroken. The echo does not belong to one civilization or one species. It belongs to life itself, always asking, always listening, always marveling. When you stand in a quiet place, perhaps among stones, perhaps by the sea, perhaps beneath a wide sky at night, you can feel this echo if you let yourself. It is the stillness that follows a question too large for answers. It is the presence of mystery pressing gently against your thoughts. It is the comfort of knowing that not knowing is part of the story. The earth hums with this echo, softly, endlessly, carrying memories we cannot access but can still feel. And so we end not with resolution, but with resonance. The first cities may never reveal themselves to us. They may be only imagination, only story. Or they may truly be hidden, erased but not entirely gone. Either way, the echo remains. It reminds us that the earth is older than our memory, wiser than our knowledge, and gentler than our certainty. It reminds us that the beauty of life is not only in answers but in questions that carry us forward. The quiet echo is the gift of deep time. It tells us that even in silence there is connection. Even in absence there is meaning. Even in impermanence there is beauty. And when we listen to it, we realize that we do not need to solve the mystery of the first cities. It is enough to feel the echo, to let it shape our wonder, and to walk gently through the world knowing that we are part of something vast, fragile, and endlessly mysterious. And so we leave the question here, softly, in the silence. Perhaps the first cities were built millions of years ago. Perhaps they were not. The earth will not tell us. She holds her secrets behind the curtain of time, but she does allow us to ask, to imagine, to listen. And in that listening, in that wondering, we find what we truly seek, not certainty, but peace.